5 different foods, 1 vine, almost no cost, and somehow we let it vanish. Let's go back to 1943 in the middle of World War II. Across America, nearly 20 million people planted victory gardens. Backyards, churchyards, rooftops, factory lots. Ordinary citizens believed that even if they couldn't run the war, they could still feed their families. And those humble gardens grew 40% of all the vegetables Americans ate that year. Not giant corporations, not global supply chains, just everyday people who put seeds in the ground with their own hands. But over time, that mindset faded. Somewhere along the way, we were convinced that feeding ourselves requires chemicals, patented seeds, and fragile global supply chains. But what if one plant could grow on a simple trellis in your backyard, at almost no cost, and give you 5 different foods, from roots to flowers? A plant that pulls nitrogen from the air and feeds your soil as it grows. A plant with more protein than almost anything else in a home garden. Decades ago, researchers called it a supermarket on a stalk. Hat plant has a long scientific name, Sophocarpus tetragonalobus. Most of us just call it the winged bean. And then it faded from public attention. Not because it failed, but because it didn't fit modern industrial agriculture. If you remember the Victory Garden era, this knowledge was meant for you. The winged bean isn't just a vine. It's a reminder of the power we once had, and can reclaim. In 1975, the National Academy of Sciences gathered leading experts to find overlooked crops that could fight global hunger. Resilient, nutritious plants that didn't depend on chemicals or perfect soil. Out of hundreds, one stood out, Sophocarpus tetragonalobus, the winged bean. Scientists called it exceptional. Almost every part of the plant is edible and nutritious. The seeds contain 34 to 40% protein, rivaling soybeans, and provide complete protein without special processing. The leaves are rich in calcium and iron, like spinach. The pale blue flowers are edible. The young pods, with 4 ridges or wings, are crisp and tender, often compared to asparagus and green beans. The mature seeds can be dried, roasted, or ground into flour. And underground, the tubers contain up to 10 times more protein than a potato, a rare trait for a root crop. 5 foods, 1 plant, a full food system wrapped into a single vine. But that's not all. Like other legumes, the winged bean forms a partnership with nitrogen-fixing bacteria in its roots. Together, they convert nitrogen from the air into a usable form for plants. In simple terms, it feeds itself. And, more than that, it leaves the soil richer than before, adding slow-release nitrogen for whatever you plant next. In a world that spends over $200 billion annually on synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, produced in massive, energy-intensive factories, this vine quietly does the job on its own. And that's where the story becomes bigger than a garden. The power to feed yourself was never taken. It was never outlawed. It was never destroyed. It was simply forgotten. Those fertilizers don't just stay local, they're loaded onto ships, hauled down highways, and spread across fields, and only part of it even feeds the crops. The rest? It seeps into groundwater, fuels algae blooms, or drifts up into the sky as powerful greenhouse gases. And meanwhile, here sits a simple climbing vine, one most Americans have never heard of, doing that same job. Quietly, naturally, no factories, no pollution, no price tag. It pulls nitrogen out of thin air and improves the soil right under your boots. That's not just a neat little detail. that challenges a system built on selling inputs year after year. Because when a plant feeds itself and leaves the soil richer than it found it, there isn't much left to sell. So when I look at the winged bean, I don't just see protein. And while companies sell fertilizer by the ton, this plant manufactures it underground, silently for free. And for gardeners, especially older folks who don't want to haul heavy bags or pour chemicals into their dirt, this plant offers something you can't put a price on: independence, freedom from buying fertilizer, freedom from rising costs. The winged bean proves something simple. Nature already figured out solutions we're told we have to purchase. And the more I learn about how this plant works, the more I realize how easily practical plants get overlooked when they don't fit large-scale systems. And that's where the story takes a turn. By that point, we know how powerful this plant is. It feeds you. It feeds the soil. It gives 5 different foods from one vine. So what came next? What happened wasn't a scientific failure. It was a shift in priorities and money. After the National Academy of Sciences praised it, research centers in tropical regions began serious testing. Trials started in the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, and parts of Africa where food shortages were a real concern. And for a brief moment, it looked like this vine was about to change the future of food. High nutrition, adaptability, better soil, strong performance even in poor ground. In Papua New Guinea, this wasn't some lab curiosity. Communities had been growing winged bean for centuries. They ate the pods, the leaves, the seeds, even the tubers. It wasn't exotic or experimental. It just worked. And then it stalled. Even with positive results, research slowed down. Promised funding for expansion never fully showed up. Plans to roll it out to millions of small farmers quietly faded. Extension programs lost momentum. Universities shifted their focus. So what changed? The timing. 20 years after scientists praised the winged bean, a different kind of crop began taking over American fields. Not a plant designed to feed the soil, but one designed to survive chemicals. Seeds were engineered to withstand heavy spraying of a specific herbicide, sold by the same company that owned the patents on the seeds. Farmers could plant them, but not own them. Saving seed became illegal. Each season meant buying again, and each acre required the matching chemical package. From a business standpoint, it was brilliant. From a soil standpoint, it moved agriculture in the opposite direction of independence. Now, stack that up against the winged bean. No required annual seed purchase. No licensing contracts. No chemical inputs. It makes its own fertilizer. It grows in land considered too poor for many commercial crops, and you can save your seeds. Free. Every year. One path let farmers save their own seeds. The other required a contract. One path offered recurring revenue, patents, corporate control, and guaranteed annual sales. The other path offered independence, resilience, and something you don't hear about much anymore: food sovereignty. The ability to plant a seed, harvest it, and save it without signing anything. So let me ask you straight up. Which path do you think pulled in billions in research dollars, and which one slowly slipped into the background? Not because it didn't work, but because it didn't make money for the people writing the checks. That timeline tells us something important. The winged bean wasn't pushed aside because it failed. It faded because it worked, just not in a way that boosted profits. And that's exactly why this matters, especially for gardeners who still remember what real self-reliance feels like. Now, maybe you're thinking, That's interesting history. But I live in Ohio, or Tennessee, or North Carolina. Isn't this some tropical vine? That's a fair question. For years, that assumption kept American gardeners from even trying it. But here's what might surprise you. You can grow winged beans across large parts of the United States, not just in steamy jungles. Throughout the South, the Southeast, big stretches of the Southwest, and even coastal areas. If you can grow tomatoes through the summer, if you've had success with pole beans, chances are your climate is warm enough. The winged bean thrives in USDA zones 8 through 12, covering millions of backyards. And for years, flowering was the obstacle. Traditional varieties needed short daylight hours, so northern growers didn't see blooms until fall, right when frost arrived. But newer day neutral varieties like Hunan and Urizun changed that. They flower and produce all summer long as nighttime temperatures stay above 70 degrees. If you've got around 120 frost-free days, common in Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, California, and even parts of Virginia, you can grow them. And people already are. Seeds aren't hard to find. Small seed companies and heirloom growers carry them. And because this plant was never absorbed into the industrial seed system, there are no licensing restrictions. You can save your seeds for next year. Growing it feels much like growing a strong pole bean. It'll climb 10 to 12 feet in a season. Give it full sun and something sturdy, a trellis, a fence, even tall corn. And once it starts flowering, it keeps producing. Harvest the pods when they're 1 to 3 inches long for that crisp, asparagus meets green bean flavor. Let some mature for protein-rich seeds, and certain varieties even produce starchy, high-protein tubers underground. Same vine, different harvests. So why does this matter right now? Because this isn't just a tropical novelty. It's a practical, nutritious, soil-building crop that regular Americans, including retirees, can grow without draining their soil or their wallet. It reminds us that feeding your family doesn't require corporate permission. Just seeds, sunlight, and the willingness to try. 1 vine, 5 foods. Built-in fertilizer. Now that you know it can grow here, the question isn't whether it can transform your garden. The question is whether you're willing to let it. And let's clear something up. This isn't about secret meetings or hidden conspiracies. What happened was quieter and more predictable. In agriculture, just like in medicine or energy, the biggest threat to profit is independence, and the winged bean creates independence. Imagine 2 proposals on a funding desk. Option A: a legume that grows in poor soil, fertilizes itself, produces multiple foods, and lets farmers save seeds forever. It reduces fertilizer costs and dependency, but there's no recurring revenue, no patent, no annual chemical package. Option B: a patented crop designed to work with proprietary herbicides. Farmers must buy new seed each year and purchase specific inputs from the same company. Which one guarantees steady profits? Not because it's better for soil, not because it's healthier, but because it creates predictable revenue. That's not conspiracy. That's market logic. So, through the 80s and 90s, while fertilizer profits climbed and seed patents consolidated, the winged bean quietly slipped out of sight. It wasn't banned. It wasn't destroyed. It was simply ignored, stored in seed banks, filed in research papers, preserved on paper instead of planted in soil. Meanwhile, fertilizer costs soared. Corporations reported record earnings. And all the while, this vine existed, making its own nitrogen, reducing dependency, giving growers more control. It could have protected millions of small growers then, and it still can. But someone has to plant it. If you're in your 60s, 70s, or 80s, you remember something younger generations are just rediscovering. There was a time when most American households had real gardens, not as decor, not as nostalgia, but because that's how families ate. Gardening was practical, purposeful, in many places patriotic. Neighbors worked side by side. Strength grew from soil and shared effort. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that food comes from supermarkets, and that real agriculture belongs to giant machines and chemical inputs. But you remember different. And now younger families are waking up to that truth again. During the pandemic, home food growing surged. Even small gardens reduced food insecurity and improved mental well-being. Communities revived victory garden traditions in backyards and shared plots. And this is where you come in. Gardening keeps your body moving, your mind sharp, your spirit grounded. Many retirees are mentoring, teaching, sharing seeds, and building community resilience. Your experience matters. Picture this: early spring. You plant one row of winged beans. By late summer, you're harvesting crisp green pods with that fresh asparagus-like bite. Maybe you add pale blue flowers to a salad. You dry mature seeds, rich in complete protein. And you realize something simple. You didn't just grow food. You reclaimed something.